Imagine a nation of warriors so fierce, so strategically brilliant, that they forced the United States Army to retreat, abandon their forts, and sign a treaty on native terms. That actually happened, and the people who pulled it off were the Lakota, a nation that had itself been driven from its homeland just a century before. This is their story. Welcome to Frontier Uncensored. I'm your host, Dustin, and today we're diving deep into one of the most dramatic sagas of the American West, the rise and resistance of the Lakota people. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Now let's get into it. Long before the United States existed, the people we now call the Lakota were part of a larger alliance known as the Great Sioux Nation, a confederacy that included the western and eastern Dakota tribes. The word Lakota itself means friends or allies. But make no mistake, these were not a passive people. They were skilled hunters, fierce warriors, and masters of survival on some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. The Lakota Nation was organized into 7 major bands called the Oceti-Sakowin, or the 7 Council Fires. The largest of these was the Tungwang, meaning the people of the plains. Within that group, the most prominent sub-band was the Oglala, who the United States government would later officially recognize as the Oglala Sioux tribe. Their sacred homeland centered around the Black Hills of South Dakota, a place of deep spiritual significance that would become the flashpoint for decades of conflict. But here is what most history books skip over. The Lakota were not originally plains people at all. Their ancestors lived in regions like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, part of a broader confederacy called the Oceti. So how did they end up as the dominant force on the Great Plains? The answer starts with a conflict far to the east. Around 1650, the Ojibwe, also known as the Anishinaabe, began pushing westward from the Great Lakes region in search of new hunting grounds. They called their rivals Naduasi, meaning little snakes, a term that French traders shortened and mispronounced into what we know today as Sioux. The Ojibwe had a critical advantage: guns acquired through the fur trade. Armed with firearms, they pushed the Teton bands, the ancestors of the Lakota, steadily westward, out of the woodlands, and onto the open plains. The transition was brutal. The Great Plains offered no shelter, no forest cover, and a climate that swings from scorching summers to deadly blizzards. Survival meant constant movement, following the massive buffalo herds that once numbered 60 to 80 million animals across North America. In the Lakota language, the buffalo is called Tatanka, meaning he who owns us. That phrase says everything about how central the buffalo was to their entire way of life: food, clothing, tools, shelter. Without the buffalo, the Lakota did not exist. Then, in the 1730s, everything changed again. This time, the game changer came on 4 legs. The Cheyenne people introduced the horse to the Lakota, and within a generation it transformed them completely. Hunters became warriors. Warriors became conquerors. Young men raided rival camps not just for survival, but to claim horses as trophies, a rite of passage that proved courage and skill. The Lakota warrior on horseback, armed with a bow and lance, became one of the most formidable fighting forces on the continent. With horses and momentum, the Lakota began pushing outward in every direction. To the north, they were blocked by the Iron Confederacy and the Blackfoot along the Canadian Rockies. To the east, the Arikara held the Missouri River. But to the west, in the shadow of the Black Hills, opportunity beckoned. The Black Hills had already changed hands multiple times, held at various points by the Arikara, the Pawnee, the Arapaho, the Crow, and the Kiowa. By the 1760s, the Cheyenne controlled the region. But the Lakota had set their sights on it, and they were relentless. Through a combination of raids and sustained military pressure, the Lakota gradually wore down the Cheyenne, who were simultaneously being weakened by devastating European diseases. By 1776, the very year the United States declared independence on the East Coast, the Lakota had claimed the Black Hills. A people who had been refugees just 100 years earlier were now the dominant power in the northern plains. Have you ever heard that the Lakota took the Black Hills in the same year America was born? Drop a comment below, because that timing is wild when you think about it. But the clock was already ticking on their dominance. In 1803, Napoleon sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States, a massive land deal that put American ambitions directly on a collision course with Lakota territory. The first face-to-face meeting came in 1804, when explorers Lewis and Clark entered Lakota lands. The encounter started with tension and ended with mutual contempt. William Clark wrote dismissively of the Lakota in terms that revealed exactly how the United States government viewed indigenous peoples. The Lakota, for their part, saw the Americans as aggressive and disrespectful of the land. Through the 1840s, thousands of American settlers poured westward along the Oregon Trail, cutting straight through Lakota territory and hunting buffalo along the way. By 1845, the U.S. Army was sending soldiers into the region to intimidate the Lakota into allowing safe passage. Red Cloud and his warriors were not impressed. The Americans wanted a confrontation, but they were tied up in a war with Mexico, so an uneasy standoff held, for now. In 1851, the U.S. government attempted diplomacy. At Fort Laramie, leaders from multiple nations gathered to negotiate boundaries. The Lakota sent Chief Conquering Bear, and an agreement was reached that allowed Americans to build roads and forts in exchange for goods and recognition of native territorial claims. But the agreement fell apart almost immediately, as leaders who had not been present rejected its terms and resumed raiding. Then came the incident that lit the fuse. A Lakota warrior killed a cow belonging to a Mormon settler. The owner complained to Fort Laramie. Conquering Bear attempted to resolve the situation peacefully, offering his own horse as compensation. The Americans refused. The next morning, 30 soldiers marched to the Lakota camp demanding the man responsible. When Conquering Bear refused to hand him over, the soldiers opened fire. Conquering Bear was killed. Warriors led by Red Cloud responded, and the confrontation that followed became known as the Grattan Massacre. The Army's retaliation came the following year. On September 3, 1855, American forces attacked a Lakota village at Blue Water Creek, killing more than 80 men, women, and children. There were no rules of engagement, no limits on what soldiers could do. The brutality shocked Lakota leaders and temporarily pushed both sides toward a ceasefire. But the peace was fragile and would not last. Through the early 1860s, the United States was fighting on multiple fronts against the Shoshone, the Dakota, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. Their resources were stretched thin. Then, in 1863, the construction of forts along the Bozeman Trail, a route used by miners heading to Montana, pushed the Lakota too far. Red Cloud forged a powerful alliance with the Cheyenne and Arapaho, uniting old rivals against a common enemy. On July 26, 1865, 3,000 Allied warriors attacked the American garrison at Platte River Bridge, cutting off the Bozeman Trail entirely. The U.S. responded by sending 2,500 troops to reopen the route. But Red Cloud's strategy was not to fight the Americans head-on. Instead, his warriors launched constant ambushes, hit-and-run attacks on patrols, and raids on supply wagons. It was guerrilla warfare at its finest. The campaign reached its defining moment near Fort Phil Kearny in Wyoming. Captain William Fetterman led 81 soldiers out to respond to what looked like a small raiding party. It was a trap. Crazy Horse had lured them perfectly into a killing ground surrounded by hundreds of Lakota warriors. In less than 20 minutes, all 81 American soldiers were dead. It was the worst defeat the U.S. Army had suffered west of the Mississippi up to that point. Washington could not ignore it. In 1868, United States representatives traveled to Fort Laramie and signed a treaty on Lakota terms, recognizing their rights to the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills, and agreeing to abandon the forts along the Bozeman Trail. Red Cloud's War, as it came to be known, was one of the only conflicts in American history where the United States fought, lost, and then signed a treaty acknowledging the other side's victory. But the peace lasted barely a decade. In the mid-1870s, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. Miners flooded into the region in violation of the treaty, and the U.S. government chose profit over promises, demanding the Lakota surrender the Black Hills. When the Lakota refused, the Army moved in. What followed was the Great Sioux War. General Philip Sheridan pursued a strategy of targeting the buffalo herds, deliberately wiping out the Lakota's food supply to force them into submission. But before that strategy could fully take effect, the Lakota struck a blow that shocked the entire nation. In June of 1876, Crazy Horse led a combined force of Lakota, Arapaho, and Northern Cheyenne warriors against General George Crook at the Battle of the Rosebud, stopping his advance cold. 1 week later came an even more stunning victory. At the Battle of the Little Bighorn, fought within the boundaries of land guaranteed to the Lakota by the 1868 treaty, Crazy Horse led the Allied forces against Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry. In a battle that lasted only a matter of hours, 258 American soldiers were killed, and the regiment suffered casualties exceeding 50%. Custer himself was among the dead. The nation was stunned, but the U.S. Congress responded by allocating funds to expand the Army by 2,500 additional soldiers, and the weight of that expansion was overwhelming. Through a relentless series of winter campaigns and battles, the U.S. Army ground down the Lakota's ability to fight. By 1877, the Great Sioux War was over. The Lakota were confined to reservations, banned from hunting buffalo beyond their boundaries, and forced to depend on government-issued rations. That same year, under circumstances that remained deeply controversial, certain Lakota leaders signed over the Black Hills to the United States. Many Lakota have never accepted the legitimacy of that transfer, and the legal battle over ownership of the Black Hills continues to this day. What do you think? Should the United States honor the original 1868 treaty? Let us know in the comments. It is a conversation that is still very much alive. Despite everything, the Lakota people endured. Their population, estimated at around 8,500 in 1805, actually grew through the 19th century, reaching over 16,000 by the end of it, one of the very few Native American nations to see population growth during that era. By 2010, more than 170,000 people identified as Lakota, though only about 2,000 still spoke the language fluently. The story of the Lakota is not simply a story of defeat. It is a story of a people who adapted from woodland refugees to plains warriors, who built alliances across old rivalries, who forced the most powerful government in North America to retreat and sign a treaty on their terms, and who survived everything that followed with their identity and spirit intact. Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull. These are not just names in a history book. They are men who fought for something real and whose legacy still shapes the American West. That is the Lakota story, and it is one that every student of the frontier needs to know. Thanks for watching Frontier Uncensored. If this episode taught you something new, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. History out here does not pull its punches, and neither do we.